Hello and welcome back to Red Right Hand Forge. This is Marshall, and in my last video, which I'll put in the description, or I can put it up here, like through the magic thing. I'm still getting used to making YouTube videos, so hopefully I can put a link somewhere on the screen. But if not, it'll be in the description, or it'll be in both places. But anyway, in that video, I made this Damascus billet, which I cut in half. I called this Firescale Damascus because look at it. Kind of looks like fiery scales. I think it looks really cool. Should make a really neat blade. I don't have any real set parameters other than I know I want to go with a hidden tang on this one. And I'm thinking maybe something in like the fighter style profile. But that could change and evolve as we go along. We'll see. I am going to bang it out and shape a little bit on the power hammer and on the anvil. Rather than just diving straight into a stock removal, drawing the profile on the side here and then just grinding it out. And the reason for that is because of the flow of this pattern. I don't really want to just cut into that. So I am going to bang down the edges here, this corner, and kind of get a little bit of a shape and just kind of draw this out a little bit. Nothing crazy, just so it doesn't look so, abrupt if I were to just cut along my profile lines here. So yeah, I'm just gonna shape it a little bit before I get into the real detailed profile work. But yeah, other than that, I don't really know. We're just gonna see where this takes us. A lot of steel to work with here. This is still a big, thick piece of. It's almost a 1/4 inch thick. So there should be plenty for a good sized blade. Let's see what happens, and hopefully it comes out okay. All right. So right out of the gate, I feel like I should apologize to the Clay Spencer tire hammer community. Generally, these tire hammers are really easy to control. They're pretty smooth, just tough as nails, and really reliable. But occasionally you do have to adjust them to get them dialed in right. Otherwise, they can be a little hard to start and stop, and they kind of buck all over the place. And that's really all that's going on here. I just got a little lazy because it's working well enough for my purposes. But yeah, I didn't feel like going back there. And there's just a couple adjustments on the foot pedal and on the stroke and the spring in the back. And you can really get these things tuned in nicely, and they're really much easier to use than maybe what I'm showing here. So yeah, sorry to the Clay Spencer people. If you are an aspiring knife maker and you're considering a power hammer, I would definitely look into the Clay Spencer tire hammers. They're just fantastic. But anyway, moving on, as you can see, I'm just pulling the tang out here. As I said in the intro, I'm trying to use the hammer on this rather than going straight to the grinder because I don't want to just cut through the pattern. I want to draw the pattern out a little bit so that when we have a finished blade, you can actually see how it kind of pulls and flows with the shape of the blade rather than just, ending abruptly at any given point. So that's what this is all about. I'm not going to go too crazy with it. I am going to go to the grinder at some point to finish up the shape, but this will just kind of get us a little closer to that. Now at this point I hadn't really decided if I was going to put a full guard on this blade or not, but either way I want this transition, this little shelf, to be as squared up as possible. So using a square file is a good way to go about that. I think later you'll see that I actually use a file guide, which will help me put a little bit of a shelf on that point where the tang meets the ricasso. And that little shelf will cover up any minute inconsistencies or gaps that can inevitably happen at that point when you're dealing with, micrometers. Of course, now I'm just back at the surface grinder, removing some excess scale before we move forward into the bevel process. I'm using some blue layout dye here because I'm going to mark a scribe line on the center line of the spine and on the edge. I'm going to do both because this knife is going to have a false edge or swedge, so that's why I'm doing the spine as well. I'm just using a drill bit that's about the same thickness as the blade, and as long as, I don't show it here, but as long as you flip it and do both sides of the blade, you'll end up with two lines which are very close together. Mine you can't really see that there's two, but there are two there, and that'll be a good guide for you. That'll show you your center line. You can also use your calipers, or they actually, they make scribes specifically for this, but I found a drill bit works pretty well. Now, putting this false edge or swedge in can be a little dicey, and I wouldn't really recommend using the wheel like I am here. I've gotten pretty good at this over time, and I kind of gotten away with it, but it might be better to use your flat platen and pull it forward so that it doesn't lay on the wheel at one end. But if you are using the wheel, you have to kind of watch out for waves or dips as you go through it, because those inconsistencies can develop really quickly. But as you can see, this one turned out pretty well, and any waves or low spots in it or high spots, those will come out in hand sanding. I'm pretty happy with the way that one turned out. Well, there are lots of videos out there dedicated to the process of laying in your bevels on a blade. I'm going to keep it relatively simple and to the point. Before I go into the process of laying my actual bevels in, I do this sort of, I guess, pre-bevel or false bevel, and this is at a much deeper angle. This is like a 45-degree angle that I'm coming at this. And what I'm doing here is just trying to get down close to that center line that I scribed in. And what that's going to do is just kind of give me a target line when I start laying in my true bevels that I'm going to grind down to. As I mentioned earlier, I've got the file guide on here, and I'm just shaving away some of the thickness of the tang. Not much, just enough to leave a very slight shelf as the tang comes up into the ricasso. And that way, whenever I put my guard on or whatever spacer material I have just in front of the handle, it'll have a little bit of a shelf to, just kind of covers up any potential inconsistencies. Gives you a little bit more of a room for error, because it is hard to get that to meet up perfectly and not see some sort of gap there. I'm leaving the file guide on here briefly just to start my plunge line, because I want that to be consistent on both sides. So a file guide's a good way to go about that. I don't generally work with a file guide when I'm laying in my bevels, but it is a good way to start your plunge line and to make sure that one's not farther forward on one side than it is the other. And as you can see here, I'm very gently just starting at a much shallower angle to lay in a flat spot. I'm not really getting caught up in the angle of the blade or anything at this point other than the angle of that flat. I'm not turning the blade. I'm not trying to follow the curve of it. I'm just establishing that flat point. That way, as I go forward, the belt kind of wants to sit on that angle rather than roll around a corner, or if I had an inconsistent bevel there, it would be very difficult. Laying in bevels gets a little bit easier as you go along because you will establish that flatness. And your belt grinder, for lack of a better way, it'll kind of feel its way into that socket. I don't really know how else to put it. Of course, this is before I've heat treated the blade, so we're not going in too much detail when it comes to the bevels. I'm just trying to shave away some material so that post heat treat I don't have as much work to do. Well, this is kind of an embarrassing mistake, but if you'll look, I'm actually neglected to put my gloves on. And right before I strike the stamp with the hammer there, you can see I have to pull my hand away because the heat radiating off of that blade is so intense that it burned me. So as a result, I didn't get a very deep stamp, and that's a little frustrating because you really don't get second chances with that. So later you'll see that gets sanded down, and I will eventually put my benchmark in using an electro etcher. I do 2 normalization cycles before I go in for the quench, and essentially that means bringing the blade up just past the point of magnetic or non-magnetic, and then letting it cool down to room temperature slowly. While I'm waiting for the blade to cool, this is a good opportunity for me to heat up the quench oil, and this is how I do it. I just throw a piece of rebar into the forge and put it into the oil. Bring that oil up to about 135 degrees Fahrenheit is ideal for quenching high carbon steel. And as you can see, before it goes into the quench, once again I'm just bringing up past magnetic, and then kind of letting it sit in there for another 30 seconds after that point. But I'm always moving the blade around. I'm moving forward and back, and sometimes I twist it a little bit. I just want to make sure that I'm watching the color very carefully here. I want to make sure that it's heating up as uniformly as possible, and that'll help avoid things like bends or cracks or any of the other horrible issues that can arise when you're heat treating a blade. This one worked out just fine, no catastrophes, and we've got a good hardened blade. Well, that's it for part 1 of this blade build, and the next segment we will finish the bevels and of course hand sand and finish the steel itself, and then we'll move into the handle process, and when it's done we'll have a completed knife, barring any unforeseen tragedy. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, as always, just leave them in the comments and I will definitely get back to you.